Well, good morning. Thanks very much for joining us. Hope you're enjoying your holiday season, and I hope you'll enjoy our conversation today. As you may have noticed, we're taking some time here at the end of the year to reflect back and look ahead with some of the state's leading political figures, and that certainly describes our guest this morning, the Speaker of the Massachusetts House, Representative Robert DeLeo of Winthrop. Mr. Speaker, Happy New Year.
Thank you, and same to you, John. Many more. Good health.
Thank you. Good to have you here. You are looking good. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling wonderful. I'm ready to go with the new year and very excited.
Is that a threat to your critics and your opponents, sir?
We'll see what happens in the coming year.
Okay, so you're not denying it. That's a good headline. Mr. Speaker, looking back on 2015, what would you say was your proudest accomplishment?
I think we had a number of accomplishments. I think the addressing the tea issue. I think addressing the tea issue to the point where we formed a control board, which basically gave the power of the control board to the governor, and therefore had more say-so in terms of the funding of the tea. In addition to that, I think the waiver of the Pacheco law, I think, again, gave the governor a lot more power over the tea in terms of whether it's cost or timing of various items. So I think the fact that we had such a very difficult situation that we had to deal with, and that we dealt with it forthright is something which I'm very, very pleased with. I think that the issue relative to the shortfall that we faced, addressing that immediately, I think was very important. So those are just two of the matters at the top of my head.
Okay, let's look on the flip side now. Reflecting back, what would you say was your biggest blunder this year?
I think we started rather slowly because of the fact of the joint rules that discussion. We really didn't start hearings until probably March or April. So I think that if you take a look at some of the things we did do, we addressed the public records law at the end of the session. We addressed the net metering / solar question at the end of the session. Possibly if we didn't get off to that later start, those would already be in the rearview mirror. And we would have accomplished those already, had laws in place.
What surprised you most about what happened this year?
I'd have to say I didn't know what the governor was going to be all about, first of all. As I said with him on a number of occasions, I've heard, you know, it was going to be terrible dealing with him. It was going to be the most unbelievable experience I would have ever had dealing with him. And I'd have to say he's been wonderful to deal with. I've enjoyed working with him thoroughly. I think he's been, a gentleman who's willing to listen. I think he's willing to change his mind if he feels that there is a better way of doing things. And I think his working with the Democratic leaders of both the House and the Senate, and members for that matter, I think has been good.
Who's a better governor, him or Deval Patrick?
I've enjoyed working with both of them. I'd have to tell you, I'd have to say a little bit different personalities, but I'd have to say I did work well with both of them. I think with both of them, we've gotten some great things done.
What a politic answer. Thank you. All right, take a break, Mr. Speaker. When we come back, we'll look ahead now to what's going to be an action-packed 2016 on Beacon Hill when we continue. Stay with us. Welcome back. We're talking with House Speaker Robert DeLeo. And Mr. Speaker, earlier this month, you and House Ways and Means Chairman Brian Dempsey said new taxes for 2016 are off the table. Don't even bother. Why?
I think similar to last year. I think that when we take a look in terms of the economic condition of the Commonwealth, when you take a look in terms of what families are going through right now, quite frankly, I don't think that any further tax burden on families is helpful. Obviously, it's not helpful to them. as they're trying to raise a family, you know, and pay their bills. And the same thing, I think, with our businesses. We're in a stage now we're trying to develop, even more so, Massachusetts, bring businesses in, keep businesses here. And I think to raise the tax burden on them as well, I think would be a mistake because, again, you know, they could look elsewhere in terms of where they cite their business.
Well, that's been a fairly consistent position of yours in recent years. The latest revenue forecasts for the coming year are not all that robust. There's all sorts of new spending on the table on the MBTA, on fighting opioid abuse, just to name a couple of examples. How are those numbers going to add up, sir?
First of all, on the opioid abuse, we've sort of have addressed that, you know, somewhat in the sub-budget, which we had just accomplished. I think right now one of the first items that we'll be taking up as a House is going to be talk a little bit about what we're going to do with those funds. As we have done in the past, are we going to provide more bedding, more counseling? You know, how are we going to address some of the present issues of this all-out war against opioid abuse? Relative to the T, John, as I stated before, and I haven't seen anything to change my mind as of right yet, I want to see exactly or have the confidence in the T that the agency is being run properly. I think we're on our way, hopefully, with this control board. I think hopefully we're on our way with some of the changes that, you know, that we made, particularly in the House, that the governor agreed with. So I want to see those changes put into effect to make sure that, for instance, a couple of years ago, there isn't a situation where we had some money coming in from the federal government that was never spent.
Right.
You know, and hopefully it'll be operated much better. Both fiscally and schedule-wise.
One last thing I want to slip in while we're almost out of time here, but certainly the charter school issue, raising the cap, increasing access, getting kids off that waiting list who want to go to charter schools is a big issue facing you in the coming year. There's a ballot question looming on the horizon. I know you in the legislature would like to take care of it yourselves. The teachers union apparently would prefer to go to the ballot. Are we going to have a bill, and what's your the state of your position on this?
Talking to the Senate President, I think they're still up in the air in terms of what's going on. I don't think they have a definitive answer in terms of whether they'll take it up. I will tell you, I think that we're ready to take it up. In my discussions with the chair, Alice Peisch, in my discussions, you know, John, with some of the advocates, and most importantly, some of the parents. Some of the parents are crying out to me and to all of the legislature that they want what's best for their children. They want the opportunity to choose. And if they feel that there's a better opportunity for their child to go to a charter school, then they'd like to have that, and I'd like to give it to them.
Mr. Speaker, thank you for coming over. We'll look forward to talking with you often in the coming year. Appreciate it.
Looking forward to it. Thank you, John, as always.
Thank you, sir. House Speaker Robert DeLeo. That's it for us. Now it's back to my colleagues for more WBZ News.